Hey, Richard. Doing well. How are you?
Good, good. So Sean's actually calling from Tel Aviv right now. He was just at the Starkware Sessions conference this week. So yeah, maybe before we start, I'm curious to hear how did that go? Like, what's the quick recap?
Starkware is the company behind Starknet. They call it its ZK rollup on top of Ethereum. Basically, a way to scale Ethereum to much less gas fees and much faster execution. And Starkware, I think, is one of the leading companies in terms of scaling blockchains. And this week was their flagship event. And our company, StarkScan and Aspect, had an opportunity to be a gold sponsor, and we had a chance to share what we were building to a really big audience. So yeah, it was really fun. We met so many people. I lost my voice, I think, on the second and third day, just from talking to so many people excited about the space. So yeah, we had a really great time. We also went to the Starkware offices to see, the people that is building this really cool technology. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Cool. Well, glad to hear your voices
Yeah,
back for this.
yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
but maybe let's back up a bit and talk a bit about your background. How you got into the Starkware ecosystem. What were you doing in crypto before you started Aspect and StarkScan?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started looking at crypto when I was in college in around 2017. At that time, I was sort of working out of the Ethereum Foundation, and I was looking more at the blockchain architecture. I knew that Ethereum didn't really scale, right? So when you paid a transaction on Ethereum, you'll pay a couple of dollars at that time in gas fees. And I knew that that sort of limited a lot of the applications that were able to be built. So I focused more on the architecture, on like proof of work, proof of stake. And then when I graduated, I started working for blockchain.com. They're one of the first crypto companies ever. They started in 2011, a couple of years even before Coinbase. Brian Armstrong, I think, was part of that crew as well. And since they were so early, they were mostly a Bitcoin focused company, right? There's a crazy stat. I remember like 40% of Bitcoin transactions go through a blockchain.com wallet. And I think in 2021, they sort of saw the use cases develop in Web3 and crypto, things that Nick mentioned, things like DeFi and NFTs. And we obviously, like at blockchain, didn't want to be left behind by all these use cases that were emerging. So I was on the exploratory team that was looking at scaling better support for Ethereum on our wallet, and we looked at all sorts of layer two blockchains on Ethereum that sort of promise to scale Ethereum to even a wider user base. So I was looking at side chains, optimistic rollups, ZK rollups, basically different methods to scale Ethereum. And from my own research and looking at Vitalik's blogs, it seems like ZK rollups had the biggest potential, and it seemed like the long-term solution to scale Ethereum. And then I started looking at different ZK rollup solutions, and I think at that time the only available one was Starknet. So that's how I got to know the ecosystem. And then I was like, what app can I build on this very scalable chain? And then I realized I was like one of the first handful of developers, and there was basically no tooling on the chain. And there was no way from my website to even talk to the Starknet network. And that's why I started a JavaScript library called Starknet.js, which is like the Ethers.js or Web3.js equivalent in Ethereum. And now it has and now basically the whole ecosystem is using this library if they have a user-facing website or product. And I think that's sort of how I really got started building in the Starknet ecosystem. And I think over the past year, we've seen a lot of growth in the space. And yeah, very happy to be here, in Tel Aviv to be a part of this ecosystem.
Yeah. I was super impressed when you first told me that you built the Starknet JS library because it's this critical like infrastructure that's used by every project in the Starkware ecosystem. And also like one
Yeah.
cool thing is because Sean built the library, he basically like knows every new project that's building in this ecosystem because they all go to him for like support questions. So that's how he hears about other founders, interesting people building. It's like one thing you touched on earlier. So you talked about how you were doing research in like different scaling solutions, and you landed on ZK rollups. Maybe like dive deeper into why you think ZK rollups is like the best long-term scaling solution compared to like optimistic rollups, side chains, other L1s.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before I answer that question, I think I want to really commend Starkware as well for, not really like giving space for projects and, people to build. I think there are other ecosystems where the chain itself would build a lot of the tooling. They would build the infrastructure, build the wallets, build the like Explorer products as well, and that leaves not as much space for an organic ecosystem to grow. So the fact that Starkware sort of let go of control and sort of let an ecosystem grow organically, I think was really brave of them and allowed a lot of big companies to sort of start on Starkware and Starknet as well. To sort of answer your question, so I think what the things with side chains is, I think the thing with rollups in general is it's called a rollup because when you send a transaction on the layer two, the transaction gets compressed and sent to layer one, right? To be sent to layer one and verified on layer one. And that means that the final state, and it's not, the state is verified until it is gone to layer one. So I think the true source of truth is always the layer one blockchain. And that's why rollups inherit the security from layer one chains, right? And because Ethereum is sufficiently decentralized, it's sort of the most, resistant to centralized forces on the chain. So I think that's why that makes rollups very very interesting because it bootstraps sort of the security of the layer one chain, and because Ethereum is a very decentralized protocol, it's very resistant to centralized power, right? And rollups can leverage that. So in terms of rollups, there's two main rollup solutions, right? Like I mentioned optimistic rollups and ZK rollups. Um, so from a high level overview, I think optimistic rollups, you're able to send transactions, but then you have a 2-week dispute period where you can challenge a transaction and say that transaction is wrong. And because of that 2-week period, when you withdraw funds, it can take 2 weeks to withdraw the funds, right? Whereas ZK rollups, because it's secured by cryptography, you can withdraw funds in 10 minutes or less, right? Because it's secured by math essentially, rather than people challenging your your transactions. So I think but I think the trade-off there is that the mathematics to actually verify those ZK transactions is still sort of a work in progress, and that's why it's still progressing quickly, but I think in terms of maturity, it's still not as mature as optimistic rollups. But I think in the long term, ZK rollups will be the ideal solution just because it doesn't have the 1 to 2 week dispute period where you have to wait for your funds to actually withdraw from layer one. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, a lot of people don't notice the difference between rollups and side chains, but like side chains like Polygon are actually more similar to other L1s because they don't inherit the security of Ethereum, and that's why optimistic and ZK rollups are actual L2s because they default to the Ethereum like base layer security.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I just, you started in the Starkware ecosystem, building Starknet JS, building a lot of infrastructure and tooling. And like talk a bit more about like how you landed on Aspect, like decided to build that as like the first like consumer facing product.
Yeah, like you mentioned, for me, I was always interested in consumer adoption in crypto. I wasn't as into DeFi as I was into more use cases that I think average people are really interested in, right? And I think I got really excited when I sort of saw the NFT bull run in late 2020 and early 2021. I think my first DM to Richard on Twitter was around that time. And I find NFTs very fascinating because I think, it's very social, it's community based, and it's very cultural. Whereas, DeFi is sort of, you're just looking for yield, right? And looking at numbers go up. But I think NFTs can be so much more than that. And I think in terms of consumer adoption, consumers are probably going to be more interested in something that's more more general to a wider audience. And I think something like a scalable chain is very important, right? Because I think during the NFT bull run, people were paying like $200 in gas fees just to buy an NFT. And I think if we are to have mass adoption, we need fees to be in the sense so that people can buy and sell and connect with their favorite NFT projects and artists. So I wanted to build a consumer product on the most scalable blockchain possible, and that's how I ended building Aspect.
Yeah, and for context, Aspect is an NFT marketplace on Starknet. I agree with you. One phrase I like to use is like NFTs is crypto for normies and DeFi is crypto for elites. The average consumer just understands the use case of NFTs and JPEGs like way easier than kind of all this hard vocabulary like impermanent loss, AMMs, and like just the steep learning curve to understanding like how to use DeFi. That really appealed to your skill set. I totally forgot like how we first got connected was when you cold DM'd me on Twitter because I built a website called cryptoart.io and you had some questions about like some of the data like on the website, and that's how we first got connected.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but
and I think I can.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Because at that time I saw Richard's highest sell website, and at that time I was sort of looking at extending that by showing sort of the highest selling NFTs by day, by week, by month, right? So we could I don't know, I can see sort of how the NFT ecosystem was growing. It was funny because the day that I built that website, it was literally the day that Bored Ape started minting. And I was so confused because I was looking at my ranking site and it was like all a bunch of monkeys. And I think they were like selling at 1 ETH at that time. Obviously now it has grown substantially, but that's how I really, got in the space. And then, it's amazing to see how the space has grown. I remember at that time, any project that you saw on Twitter, if you bought it at mint, it was gonna like triple or 4 or 5x the next day. And that was really what kickstarted the bull run of NFTs at that time. So yeah, it was very exciting to see.
Cool. And what do you think, or like what specifically about Starknet do you think like makes it really suitable for NFTs? Like why would NFTs really become a big thing in Starknet?
Yeah, so I think right now on ETH, what we see with NFTs is they're more like digital assets, right? Like Bitcoin or ETH, just because it doesn't seem like you can really have many use cases because of gas limitations and mostly gas limitations and speed limitations as well. I think on Starknet we see a lot more people experimenting with on-chain gaming, and I think people are experimenting because they don't have the same limits that they do on Ethereum. So people are putting a lot more game logic on chain, and I find that to be very interesting because when you have game logic on chain, you can have sort of unstoppable games, and then you can have people deciding the rules that they want to play and then deploying that version of the game if they choose to. And then you also have other games interacting with your game in a very composable manner, right? Because when you deploy contracts onto the blockchain, they can talk to each other in new and interesting ways. So I just think, the use cases on a blockchain like Starknet is just a lot more open, right? Because you don't have the same limitations that you do on a chain like Ethereum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and like gaming is also like was in one of Nick's slides, like one of the areas that we're bullish on as like a potential like catalyst for like the next like bull wave.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like what examples of like some of the like big NFT or top NFT collections on Starknet right now?
Yeah, so I think the NFTs, the NFT collections on Starknet are still building on the chain because I think the chain still needs to mature a little bit more. But I think the sort of NFT collections and games that are showing a lot of promise, I think, are Realms and Influence. So Realms is a medieval-based strategy game, and I think Influence is a space themed strategy game, and I think they have a lot of on chain logic that I think people are very interested in. But I think they're still in the development phase, and I think as Starknet matures and gets faster, I think they will be. I think the games will be much more playable than it is today.
Mhm. Got it. And also in addition to Aspect, you also built StarkScan, which is like Etherscan. It's like the block explorer of
Yeah,
Starkware. So yeah, maybe
yeah.
talk a bit about what led you to build that as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I think when we built the NFT marketplace, what we realized was, the chain, the technology of ZK rollups itself was going to take much longer than much longer to sort of mature. But what we did see is sort of a very thriving and growing developer ecosystem, which I think makes sense, right? When I joined the ecosystem, I was probably the fifth dev looking at Starknet, but then over the past year, it's been like before I knew sort of everyone, and then they became like hundreds and then thousands, and there was a huge amount of developer growth, which I think is natural because sort of you have the devs first who build the products, right? Who then bring in the users. But then what I sort of saw was the existing Explorer built by Nethermind, who is a contractor to Starkware, sort of didn't really evolve as the developers grew in the ecosystem. So they were missing a lot of things that sort of developers needed at that time, and we just thought we could build a 10x better Explorer on Starknet, and I think it would really benefit the developers on Starknet as well. And I think based on the reception of StarkScan and basically every DApp changing their links to StarkScan links within a period of 1 to 2 weeks really speaks, I think, to the value of StarkScan and sort of what developers craved and needed at that point. So yeah, we've seen significant growth on StarkScan. I think the first month we went from zero to like close to 100,000 users, and I think we pretty much captured the entire market on StarkNet in terms of developers or users using a StarkNet block explorer. So
Mhm.
yeah, that has been very good.
And you're also monetizing StarkScan now, right?
Yeah, so we're looking at ways to monetize. So I think there's multiple ways we can do this, but I think to find a sustainable model, again, I think Starknet has to bring in enough users and for the chain to grow for us to find a sustainable model. But I think yes, we have found multiple partners who are interested to advertise on Starknet just because we have so much traffic flowing through our site, with users, checking their statuses of their transactions, and also developers using the Explorer to see their smart contracts deployed on Starknet.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And yeah, one thing I've been using StarkScan a lot lately is actually there's like a page that shows percentage of wallets accounts that have like upgraded
Yeah.
to the new StarkNet like account abstraction version. So
Yeah.
maybe talk a bit about the upcoming Starkware Regenesis
Yeah.
Cairo 1.0, like kind of what all of those
Yeah.
upgrades entail.
Yeah. So I think Starkware and Starknet took a very different approach in terms of how they released their ZK rollup chain. I think they're one of the only like ZK rollups that are actually available and in production. And the approach they took was they're going to release something, have an important organic developer ecosystem grow, and then they're going to be rapidly iterating based on the feedback from developers and users. And I think sort of there's a very big milestone that's coming up called Cairo 1.0. Basically, the smart contract language is being upgraded to something that is much more developed, and it would require a lot of wallets to be upgraded to the new version. And if they are not upgraded, funds could be lost. So I thought we could really help the ecosystem to highlight the amount of funds that need to be upgraded and how many wallets need to be upgraded, so that people can upgrade their wallets, so that when Starknet does upgrade to the newer version, they can maintain their funds. So yeah, that was very important for us, and I think the users on Starknet as well.
Yeah, and this ties to a broader question, a broader point is there's been a lot of cutting edge zero knowledge cryptography research that's been coming out of academia, and it's finally starting to get into practice, being implemented. But obviously there's a lot of bottlenecks when it works in theory, when the math works, but coding up, exactly. And you have all these other challenges. And Starknet's had a couple of these that they're working on right now. Maybe talk a bit about the bottlenecks right now with Starkware, Starknet, and kind of all this zero knowledge stuff they're doing.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's good to mention sort of their previous product called StarkX, right? So they were able to bring their zero knowledge sort of scaling solution for specific use cases, right? So Nick sort of mentioned DYDX. DYDX, I think, still is powered by StarkX, right, which is Starkware's previous scaling solution for specifically perpetrating, which is what DYDX does. And they also power a specific version of their scaling solution for immutable as well for the NFT use case. And then for Starknet, they're trying to generalize it for any sort of program, right? So instead of specific use cases, you make it completely general, and it can accept basically any arbitrary kind of logic. And like Richard said, in theory, it should be able to work as well as StarkX. Like the experience should be on par with what DYDX and Immutable X is able to offer. But I think right now there's a lot of bottlenecks, that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that can really improve the performance. For example, right now the main sequencer, or you can sort of think of it as a node, is sort of written in Python, which is not a very optimized language, but a lot of people in academia sort of use it because it's very simple and sort of easy to, I guess, explain and reason about, but it's not really meant for performance. And currently Starkware and a couple of other teams are rewriting that node in Rust, which is optimized for performance. And that is expected to increase. But right now, the sort of limit is the TPS performance. It's supposed to increase the TPS by many folds. And I think that's going to increase the experience on Starknet by a lot. So I think a big part is rewriting the node from Python to Rust. And also with the new language upgrade, Cairo 1.0, I think they're going to shed a lot of technical debt they had from Cairo, the previous version of the language. So that should unlock, again, a multiple X of TPS performance. So I think after those low-hanging fruits will be solved, I think TPS will be at a level that I think we should see beyond Ethereum. And I think that's when, they can really look at scaling what Ethereum offers.
And in I guess exact terms, how much do you think TPS will improve just from solving all those low-hanging fruits?
So I've spoken to many people at Starkware, and it really depends on who you talk to at Starkware. Like when I talked to Eli Ben Stassen, the president and chief scientist at Starkware, he would tell me it's like 50 to 100 TPS. But when I talk to product managers, it's more like 25 to 50. So it really ranges. And I think when we actually put it in practice, when we see a Rust node and we see sort of the Cairo 1.0, I think then we can really tell. But I think sort of the long-term expectation is it's supposed to scale up to thousands of TPS when they're able to optimize sort of everything fully. And they're looking at other scaling ways to scale, like with layer threes and layer fours. But I think right now the focus should be, being able to scale StarkNet very well before, thinking of those kind of long-term solutions. But I think I really appreciate Starknet because they sort of have a roadmap to scale blockchains ultimately. And I think that's what makes it really exciting. I think other blockchain or L1s or other solutions seems like there is a cap, but I think Starkware is thinking in the longest term possible. So I think that's very exciting and yeah, very interesting as well.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of just low hanging fruits, big developments in the next few years as like all the ZK stuff is being optimized and implemented in practice. And I know several teams working on the core developments in like different areas, like sequencers, provers. Yeah, bringing all of this into reality. Yeah, we got a few more minutes. We have some questions in the chat. There's one from David Pasden. Hey, David. David actually works at Phantom, and he's like super deep into wallets and everything. So he asked about, this question is, there's a Starknet snap for MetaMask, but I only see Bravos and Argent support in the connect flow on the site. Do you anticipate adding MetaMask support via the snap?
So I think the MetaMask team is looking at adding support. I work very closely with the MetaMask team on Starknet JS related things because they're using Starknet JS for the MetaMask snap. But I think they're releasing it to their MetaMask Flask, I believe, which is sort of the newer version of MetaMask before they want to roll it out to the general version. I think the MetaMask Flask version is the MetaMask that supports snaps, right? And snaps are sort of like apps and plugins on top of MetaMask. So MetaMask can be more extensible and support things like Starknet. But I think they still need to release MetaMask Flask before it can be generally available on the normal version of MetaMask. I think it's still a work in progress.
Okay. And actually, like backing up from that, like maybe it'd be helpful to explain to the audience, like what's the state of like Starknet wallets today? Like the two big wallets are Argent and Bravos, right? Maybe talk about market share, are like MetaMask Phantom getting into this? Talk about the wallet landscape.
Yeah. So in terms of the competitive landscape, I think Argent being the first Starknet wallet is sort of leading in this space. But I think Bravos is sort of offering something new. Well, they're always trying to release something new that sort of Argent doesn't have. For example, they were the first to add a hardware signer, meaning that when you sign a transaction, you also have to confirm on your phone as well. So then that adds a lot more, security because now you have two devices to sort of confirm transactions. And I think the really interesting project is called Cartridge, cartridge.gg. They basically allow you to sign transactions with your Face ID, and so they use something called WebAuthn, which allows you to sign transaction with Face ID or Touch ID, and I think that was really interesting. And I think all of these wallets are sort of supported by something called account abstraction that is natively supported in Starknet. What account abstraction means is basically now wallets are programmable, and because it is programmable, you can add logic to wallets essentially, and we can bring a lot of sort of the Web 2 experience to Web 3, things like 2FA, recovery methods. And I think that is really promising and interesting as well, because it can bring a sort of UX that sort of traditionally Web2 people are used to, things like username and password, recover your password, things like that, just because you can now program wallets. So I think there's a lot of interesting innovation there, and I would recommend people to try Cartridge to sort of check out sort of the latest developments there. and I think people will see sort of the power of what account abstraction can bring to the ecosystem.
Yeah, we're very bullish on account abstraction, and it's cool how Starknet has implements account abstraction natively, like enshrined it in the chain. So that's why there's already so many wallets with like up and coming ones like Cartridge. And we actually just invested in an account abstraction project on Ethereum that's building infrastructure for EIP 4337. So we're gonna see more wallets on Ethereum like built on top of account abstraction. But cool, yeah, we're just at time. It looks like Dan Romero from Farcaster just joined. So let's hand it off to Dan and Nick for the next chat. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for the invite.